Hello and welcome to Just a Moment. My name is Kristen Harding. Welcome to the show. Today we are continuing the story of an unread by me, but hoping we can explore it together, story of the Baron Trump novels. So, Baron Trump and the Last President by Ingersoll Lockwood, published originally in the latter part of 2 centuries ago now. Wow. So 1899? 1999? Wow. That's a long time ago. So where were we? We were journeying to the island of statues, and Baron Trump was talking to a race of people called the slow movers, and he was almost consumed by whatever it was that was on this island that made him almost turn into a statue himself. But at the very last moment, the spell was broken and his heart began to beat again. It was a very narrow escape. Another moment, he says, and I would have joined the throng of the slow movers and become a brother to the marble dwellers of the sculptor's isle. Wow, that is a narrow escape. Well, hello, Katie. Can you hear me okay? I hope so. All that night, the aged slow mover talked to me, and when the sun went up, I knew all. I knew the secret which had so darkened his placid countenance. I knew the cave in which dwelt the hermit of the sculptor's isle, an outcast, a prisoner, shut in between the narrow walls of a cavern by the sea, for no fault of his, for no sin, for no wrong. Nature had so willed it. Why, the aged slow mover knew not. Antonius was the name which the hermit bore. When morning came, I sought him out. I found him seated by his cavern's portal, looking out upon the glory of the eastern sky. This was the secret of his exile. Some cruel fate had in his youth visited him with a dread disease, not unlike that which is known as Saint Vitus' dance. When the fit was upon him, not only did he lose all control over his limbs, so that his feet bore him whither he willed them not to go, and that too with extreme rapidity, but his arms likewise executed the most rapid and vigorous gestures, now in an apparent anger, now entreaty, now wonder. You will readily understand why ill-fated Antonius came to be banished from the midst of the slow movers. Although their brother and deeply beloved of them, his lightning-like rapidity of motion, his violent gestures, his almost ceaseless change of attitude, not only offended the slow movers, it dazed them, it shocked them, it checked the sluggish flow of lifeblood within their veins, and threatened them all with slow but certain death. He must go. He did. Antonius was banished to the cavern by the sea, where never came sound, save the ocean's roar when lashed by the demons of the gale, or its sad murmur and ceaseless break and splash in its moments of slumber and rest. But most terrible of all manifestations of the unfortunate Antonio's fearful ailment was the utterly wild and ungovernable rapidity of his speech. Like maddened steeds, tongue and lips rushed along. To the eyes and ears of the slow movers, such a violently expressive face such mad rapidity of utterance, were death itself. Not one brief month would have found a living statue in that home of flinty hearts, had Antonius not gone. Antonius was thankful for that dread decree, which housed him forever in the cavern by the sea. He saw the sufferings of his people, and though his eyes in that brief time wept more tears than all his brethren ever had shed in their sluggish lives, yet were they but a poor proof of the awful grief he felt. Antonius turned toward me as I approached the spot where he sat wrapped in deep meditation. A sad, but withal kindly smile flitted about his lips, like the quick but faint glimmer of lightning in the distant sky. He rose. I paused to await his bidding to approach him. He spake not a word, but stretched out his hand. I bounded forward to clasp it and press it to my lips. At that instant the fit fell on him. I could see the look of pain which flashed across his face. Away he glided, now backward, now forward, now sideways, now obliquely, his hand outstretched in a desperate effort to reach me, who, with equal desperation, advanced and retreated in a mad endeavor to grasp what constantly eluded me. Bulger, utterly unable to comprehend this wild dance among the rocks of that cavernous shore, followed my heels barking furiously. I could take no time to quiet him. Away, away sped Antonius with redoubled speed, his right hand extended toward me as if with a pitiful prayer to grasp it and thus end the fit which was shaking his limbs so furiously. Pausing to catch my breath, I again pursued the flitting figure with a determination to overtake it or perish in the attempt. At last it seemed to circle in smaller and ever smaller rings. Now was my time. I sprang upon that whirling form with a sort of mad desperation to seize and hold its outstretched hand. At length I held it, but no, his body had come to a rest, but now high over my head, now at my feet, now flashing up one side, now down another, now whizzing in front of my eyes, now encircling my head like a bird swift in flight, that hand went on, ever on, in its wild and mysterious course. My strength was failing me. Shall I ever be able to grasp it? Antonius, too, showed signs of yielding to that awful power of dread disease which tormented him. His face took on a strange pallor, his breast heaved convulsively. With one last despairing effort, I succeeded in catching his hand in its flight around my head. I clung to it with desperate vigor. My touch dispelled the venom from his veins. He seemed to awake as from some awful dream. He passed his hand across his eyes and he smiled. Still clinging to his hand, I gently forced him to be seated upon a rocky bench, over which the ocean had woven a velvety covering of sea-grass and weeds. Antonius, I cried, peace come upon thee. Forget thy suffering. Be as thou once wert. My touch can give thee rest, at least for a brief respite. He pressed my hand. A deep sigh lifted his breast. It was the last gasp of the demon which oppressed him. He was now at rest. To me his utterance was rapid, but not more so than that of many quick thinkers with whom I had conversed. What wouldst thou? He said, in a low but strangely sweet and mild voice. I unfolded to him the object of my coming. I went back to the finding of the Roman newspaper and my departure from my home. All All I told him all, how I had come into the home of the slow movers, how I had mistaken them for marble like the rest of the figures about the island, how I longed to have the mystery cleared up. All that day Antonius and I sat by the sea in most delightful converse. Only once at high noon did he set a brief limit to his tale, while we passed into his cavern to partake of food and drink. Good idea. Food and drink. Where were we? Here we go. With a high bounding heart, I listened to his story of the landing of the seven sculptors upon the isle. Their first task had been to rear the glorious temple with its long flight of marble steps leading down to the sea. Then they, and later their sons and their sons' sons, had set to work to people this beautiful island with almost countless figures of the rarest grace and finish. In the forest by the river's banks, through the valley, on the hillside, adown the terraces to the very water's edge, rose the faultless statues in wondrous beauty and profusion. Here, there, and everywhere forms of matchless grace gleamed, snow white amid the leafy bowers or tangled underwood. A mysterious ardor burned within the hearts of these exiled artists. It would seem that theirs was a wild sort of hope to rear on that far distant isle another Rome, an infant daughter, but fairer and whiter in her marble magnificence than the glorious mother who sat upon her seven hills. Times and times again, I thrice, threescore and ten, the wretched Paula arose out of the quarried blocks, ever fair and ever fairer, now bent in awful grief, now putting the very skies to shame with the entrancing beauty of her upturned, pleading, sweet, and pitiful face. Here and there, too, stood great Caesar, never to be forgotten for his godlike clemency in snatching the sculptors from their terrible death. As the second century of exile dawned upon the little Roman kingdom, far away beneath the southern skies, at the very moment when the colony was waxing strong and vigorous, a strange and mysterious thing happened to the dwellers in this island home of sweet content. No more male children were born. The seven sculptors, now bent with age and their faces hollowed by the sharp chisels of remorse, went one after another to the dark realm of death. Their sons, too, came into ripe manhood, and their sons grew up, happy in the possession of the glorious talent which had peopled the isle with such matchless forms of beauty. But now the race had reached the end of its long reign in the world of art. Decade after decade slipped away, and still there came not one male child to gladden the sculptor's home. A sort of blank despair sank upon the colony. The elder sculptors laid their chisels down in utter hopelessness. Even the younger wrought less and less. Still there came no boy to wake the old time song and laughter of that once joyous island home. Fingers cunning in art grew stiff with age. Hearts full of glorious inspiration waxed dull and spiritless. One by one they all went the way which mortal feet must tread. A terrible, a wonderful change had come over the people. Weighed down by this leaden grief, surrounded day and night by these speechless, motionless marble forms, which, although silent as the very clod itself, yet cried out unceasingly, Give us more companions in this solitude. These unfortunate people almost turned to marble itself. They became, in good sooth, brothers and sisters to the marble dwellers on this island. At length the end came. The last sculptor was laid upon the carved bier of the great white temple by the sea. A silence so deep, so long, so dreadful, fell upon the people that it almost seemed that their speech was lost forever. Within the dark grottos and bosky underwood they crawled to hide away from the very light of day. Their limbs, once so supple and elastic, ever ready to bear their owners over hill and across plain, delighting in the dance, inured to the race, now became heavy and slow. They seemed almost about to turn to stone, and to join the silent company around them. In good sooth, such a fate was imminent, when the happening of a joyful event averted it. A year had passed since the last sculptor had gone to join the shadowy caravan which moves forever across the desert of eternal silence, when his 7 sad-faced daughters were fairly startled by an infant's cry. But look, their widowed mother stands before them with the babe nestled in her arms. It is a son. The joyful tidings can only creep from family to family. Alas, it was too late to call them back to the old-time customs and habits, too late to start their blood again in the old-time bounding, leaping course through their veins. They were a changed people. True, their happiness came again, but it was not the same. They could smile and laugh, but it was scarcely more than the faces of marble, moved by some more mysterious power. They could talk, but so slowly fell the words, that it almost seemed some statue spoke amid the leafy coverts of the island. They could move, but snail or tortoise outstripped them with ease. Ay, they were changed indeed, fated henceforth to people their beautiful island home with living statues. For years in long flight sped away, till one century followed another, and yet the wondrous talent came back no more. It was lost forever. Long, long ago, too, the people forgot the story of their fathers. It is kept alive in the hearts of a few chosen ones, and they hand it down each quarter century to younger keepers selected for that purpose. To Antonius the secret had been thus confided, and such was the tale he told me. With a light heart, now that its weight of doubt and uncertainty had been lifted from it, I bade Antonius farewell and followed Bulger, wended my way back to the abodes of the slow movers. As I passed through one of the grooves, how about groves? That makes more sense. There are a few typos in this book. As I passed through one of the groves, peopled with marble forms, I paused. I hardly knew why, in front of an admirable bust of the great Caesar. Bulger joined me, and there we stood, children of this late day, with our eyes uplifted to the face of him whose smallest word was once copied down on waxen tablet as if it were the utterance of a god. I had always liked Caesar. We resembled each other in many ways. We were both men of action. I felt sorry for him now, that he should have been forced to live, even in the shape of marble, among such dull and inactive people as the slow movers, and I told him so. And yet, Julius, said I, called of men the great Caesar, what a fortunate thing it is that thou art not living now, for thou wouldst be overcome with shame at finding everybody reading my adventures, while the book which thou wrote concerning Gaul lies mouldy and dust covered on the shelves of the libraries. The following day, in passing that way again, and glancing up at Caesar's face, I noticed that a smile had just started at the right corner of his mouth. So stolid had he become through his long residence among the slow movers that he had just begun to be amused by the remark that I had made the previous day. Thoughts of home now arose in my mind. The fact is that shortly after my interview with Antonius in his cavern by the sea, Bulger had commenced to show unmistakable signs of homesickness. So I dispatched him with a note to the officer of my vessel to begin preparations at once for the return voyage. Bulger made haste to execute the commission. He proceeded to the foot of the marble staircase, and then by loud barking attracted the attention of the officer whom I had left in command. He sent a boat ashore, and Bulger met it with my letter in his mouth. To tell the truth, I would have fain lingered for a week or so longer among the slow movers, but it was plain to be seen that they were growing restive at my presence. On the cheeks of many of them all signs of ruddy peach bloom had disappeared. Day by day they grew more and more like their marble brethren. My quick movements so wearied their eyes that after a few hours' stay in their midst, I found myself surrounded by a company of deep sleepers. Nor dared I speak, for no matter how I softened my voice, or how slowly I uttered my words, they jarred upon the delicate ears of the slow movers, and signs of suffering gradually passed over their faces. My resolution was therefore quickly formed. With a snail's pace I passed from group to group, from bower to bower, from grove to grove, saying in a soft and measured tone, "Farewell, farewell." Then I directed my steps toward the white temple by the sea, for I knew my boat's crew were waiting there for me at the foot of the marble staircase. As I passed in front of the great Caesar statue, I turned to wave a last adieu. What saw I think you? Why, that same smile, which had begun in the right corner of his mouth several days ago, had crossed over to the other side of his face, and was just at the corner of his mouth. On the right side, whence it had all come, all was as stern and calm as when he sat enthroned at Rome and ruled the world. Several hours later, as we were busy setting the sails of my good ship, there fell upon my ear in a soft, echo-like tone the word "fair." The slow movers had begun to speak their adieu. The winds were favorable. The sails filled. As the sun went down, pouring a flood of golden light upon the beautiful marble staircase, the white temple, and the many snowy statues, which gleamed so bright and fair amid the dark foliage of the trees and vines upon the terraces of that mysterious island, I threw myself upon the deck with intent to keep my eyes fixed upon the lovely scene as long as possible. My good ship sailed away in deepest silence, for I had given orders that no one should speak above a whisper. Now the sculptor's isle had faded to a mere speck on the horizon, and now in the gathering shades of night it was swallowed up, lost forever. My heart grew heavy. Bulger nestled his head in my lap, with his loving eyes fixed full upon me, and sleep overcame us both. The sky was star-studded when we awoke. The cool night wind had refreshed me. I sprang up with the intention of going below. At that instant there came floating along the evening breeze, like a mountain echo nearly spent, a soft and mysterious sound. My ear caught it. It was well. The slow movers had finished speaking their adieu. We're on chapter 7. Hello, Paul. Oh, let's see. Chapter 7. I'm not going to read the preface because that gives it all away. So, like all lovers of a roving life, I was not long in growing tired of the quiet and simple pursuits of the inmates of the old baronial hall. At times I felt like an intruder when I caught myself sitting with eyes riveted upon the pages of some musty old volumes of strange adventures in faraway lands, while the elder baron, the gracious baroness, my loving mother, and several cousins from the neighboring estate gave themselves up to the sweet pleasures of the fireside, feasting upon honey cake, drinking hot spiced wine, playing at draughts, dominoes, or cards, now chatting in the most animated manner of the trivial things of everyday life, now bursting out in uproarious laughter at some unexpected victory won at cards or at some fireside game, silently closing my book and still more silently stealing away, I sought the quiet of my apartments, where with no other companions save faithful Bulger, I gave myself up to the unrestrained indulgence in waking dreams of a life in a storm-rocked ship, landing on strange shores, parleying with curious beings, battling with wild-visaged typhoons, or hurrying with sails close reefed and hatches battened down to gave a safe port, ere the storm's king ebon charges could rattle their roofs over our head. How about hoofs? My dear mother, the gracious baroness, made extraordinary exertions to drive away my low spirits. Knowing my fondness for coffee cake, she suffered no one to make it for me, excepting herself. And at dinner she took care to place a professor or some learned person beside me, so that I might not find myself condemned to silence for the want of a gifted mind to measure mental swords with. I like that. But all to no purpose. I grew daily more taciturn, absent-minded, and plunged into meditation. With my eyes fixed upon vacancy, I sat like one with an unbalanced mind amidst the light-hearted merrymakers. In vain the company besought me to relate past adventures, to tell them tales already thrice told. I only shook my head with a mournful smile, and made good my escape from scenes which were painful to me. Bulger felt that his little master was suffering, and coaxed with plaintive whinings to have me make known to him the cause of my grief. His joy was wild and boisterous when he saw my body servants enter my apartment bearing an empty traveling chest upon his shoulders. To tell the truth, life at the baronial hall pleased Bulger not a whit more than it did me. And we are at the time for the break, so I'm going to be back in about 3.5 minutes.
Looking for breathtaking photography that speaks for itself? Whether it's the raw beauty of nature, the sleek professionalism of corporate imagery, or the infinite wonders of the sky, Donovan Pudoka captures it all. With over 10 years of experience, Donovan's lens doesn't just take pictures, it tells stories. His work is perfect for travel publications, corporate branding, artistic prints, or anyone who appreciates stunning photography. If you need high-quality images that elevate your project, Donovan Pudoka delivers. Have we sparked your interest in Donovan's work? Check it out at matrixminds/Pudoka. My eye promises you, you will not be disappointed.
This CBD fluid is a whole flower fluid extracted from the cannabis flower. We don't use any heat, butane, or chemicals when we extract, so we get all of the components of the plant. All the CBD, CBG, CBA, all the terpenes, all the flavonoids. This allows our body to absorb at 60 to 90% rather than the average of 6 to 10% absorption you would get with a CBD oil. Because our bodies are made up of mostly water and this is a fluid, it's highly absorbable so that you're getting 500% more nutraceuticals per dose. We also have this available in our CBD spray as well as a muscle rub with all kinds of botanicals. You're going to absolutely love it.
Check it out, Brainiacs. matrixminds.live/CBD. The CBD I use. Feel free again. Feel alive again.
Hey there, Hunter. Go check out our friends at Colorado Custom Game Calls. They are all about creating a high-quality, custom, unique game calls at an affordable price. They are here for hunters that can't and won't pay upwards of $180 to $200 per game call. They pride themselves on giving their customers the opportunity to not only purchase an affordable and high-quality call, but to customize their game call to their liking. So listen up and go check them out. That's www.coloradocustomgamecalls.com. They got calls for all type of game, and all the game calls can be custom made to your own likeness. That's www.coloradocustomgamecalls.com. Tell them Matthew sent you from the Matrix Minds.
What is up, all my beautiful and gorgeous souls? I am Michelle Espinosa, otherwise known as the Shaman, through the Matrix Mind Media. So tell me, how many times have you wished that you had that special power of prediction? You know, to know what was going to happen before it actually happened and took place. To have some power and control over that situation before things came flying at you out of left field. The thing is, you actually can have that power. You can be aware of what's coming. Tune in to Astrology TV with me for Breaking the Cage. Every Sunday evening at 10 p.m. Eastern on the Matrix Mind Media. And I will go through the astrology and help put you on the right course and get you back in control of your own life. Love you guys.
And we're back. This is Just a Moment. My name is Kristen Harding. We are reading from the Barron Trump novels and The Last President by Ingersoll Lockwood. And where I left off, to tell the truth, life at the baronial hall pleased Bulger not what whit more than it did me, so they're tired of being home. And here's why. The house dogs annoyed Bulger with their attentions, and he was wont to retire from the dining hall with a look of utter disgust upon his face, when one of the family cats, in the most friendly spirit, drew near and tasted a bit of his dinner. All caresses, too, from other hands than mine were distasteful to him, and although for my sake he would permit the gracious Baroness to stroke his silken ears, yet any familiarity on the part of the elder Baron was firmly but respectfully declined. The very moment I saw my chests placed here and there in my apartment, my spirits rose. I became like another being. The color returned to my cheeks, the gleam to my eye, the old-time ring to my voice. From lip to lip the word was passed. The little baron is making ready for another journey. From early morn to the deepening shadows of twilight, I busied myself with superintending the packing of my boxes. It was a labor of love with me. I was never born for a calm life beneath the time-stained, that's a good one, the time-stained tiles of paternal halls. My heart was filled with redder, warmer blood than ordinary mortals. My brain never slept. Night and day, shadowy forms of men and things, strange and curious, swept along before me in never-ending files. One morning, while at work with my boxes, a low knock at my chamber door fell upon my ear. Bulger, scenting an enemy, gave a low growl. I swung the door open, and it was the elder baron. "Honored father," I cried gaily, "act as if thou were master here. Be sad, be gay, sit, stand, drink, eat, or fast. I think he's saying make yourself at home." "Ah, little baron," began my father in a solemn voice, "I beseech thee, give over thy jesting. When thou hast heard the object of my visit, grief will chase every vestige of mirth from thy light heart. Speak, baron, art thou a dutiful and loving son?" asked my father, fixing his dark, mournful eyes full upon me. "I am." "'Tis well," he replied. "Then arrest this making ready to abandon thy parents in their hour of misfortune. Put an end to all this unseemly hurly-burly, and to thy longing to be gone from beneath the paternal roof." The clouded face, trembling and tear-filled eyes of the elder baron shocked me. I could feel the blood leaving my cheeks, where till then it had bloomed like the glow of a ripening fruit. But I checked myself, and motioning the baron to be seated, said in a calm, though, spite me, trembling voice, "Noble father, it is thine to command, mine to obey. Speak, I pray thee, and speak too plainly, if need be harshly. Bear thy most secret thoughts. What aileth thee? What sends these dark shadows to rest on that calm, smooth brow?" "Thanks, little baron," was my father's reply, "for thy promise of obedience. This is the weight which presses on my heart. Since thou hast taken up this rambling, roving life, robbed of thy counsel and cooperation, I have seen our ancestral estate hastening to ruin. Last year our tenantry scarcely harvested enough to keep body and soul together. This year promises to turn out worse yet. Desolation sits upon the broad acres once the prize of our family. Crops fail, grass withers, and trees turn yellow. The poor cattle moan for sustenance as they winder in the dried up pastures. How about wander? I look upon all this wreck and ruin, but am helpless as a babe to stay it. Speak, my son, wilt thou? Hast thou the heart? Canst thou be so cruel as to turn thy back upon these pitiful scenes without raising thy hand to avert the impending doom?" "Baron," I interposed mildly but firmly, "facts first, eloquence thereafter. Impart unto me in plain king's speech the cause of all this ruin. What hath wrought it? What hath desolated our fair fields? What hath carried this rapine among our flocks and herds? Speak." "I will, little baron, give an attentive ear," rejoined my father, with a stately bend of the body. "An ancient Egypt, as ancient Egypt was visited with scourge and plague, So have been our ancestral acres. In pasture and grain fields, myriads of moles feed upon the tender rootlets. In grassland, swarms of meadow mice fatten on the herbage. In orchards and nurseries, countless numbers of ground squirrels spread destruction far and near. Such are the terrible scourges now laying waste our once fair estates, your pride and mine, and the envy of all beholders. Little Baron, I know that thou canst tell me that somewhere in that vast storehouse of thy mind rest plans and devices potent enough to restore these broad lands to their former beauty and productiveness. Baron, was my reply, when was there a time that thou foundst me wanting in my duty to thee, or lacking in power to assist thee? Never, said the elder Baron with great emphasis. Then betake thee to my gentle mother, the Baroness, thy consort, and comfort her. Bid her take heart. Say I will not go abroad until these pests are driven from our ancestral domain. The elder Baron rose. I accompanied him to the door, and then we saluted each other with dignity, and he withdrew to bear the glad message of my promised assistance to my sorrowing mother. Alone in my apartments, a terrible feeling of disappointment came over me. I felt that it would be useless to continue in my preparations to leave home in the face of these dire misfortunes now threatening my family. For, as I reasoned, and I think with great clearness, the name of our family would dwindle to a shadow were we robbed of these broad acres of pasture and meadowland, forest and orchard. To me, a landless nobleman had something very ludicrous about him, and I fully made up my mind that I would either save my ancestral estate from ruin, or lay aside forever my title of Baron, as gem which had lost its radiance, even as a pearl which the stolid rustic ruins for the sake of meals of victuals. That night I partook of no food, so that I might lie down with an unclouded mind. Bulger, noticing this, concluded that his little master was ailing, and likewise refused to touch food, although I ordered his favorite dish, uh, roasted rooster combs, to be prepared. Till midnight I lay awake in deepest thought over the arduous task which confronted me. At the stroke of 12, from the old clock on the stair, I determined to let my mind work out the problem itself, and turned over and went to sleep. The Baron and Baroness entered the breakfast room with unclouded brows the next morning. I greeted them very cordially. The conversation was enlivened by one or two of the elder Baron's ancient anecdotes, which he furbished up for the occasion with several new characters and an entirely new ending. I laughed heartily, as I was duty bound to do. Breakfast over, Bulger and I sailed forth. Breakfast over, comma, they forgot that. Bulger and I sallied forth to begin work. I resolved to attack the moles first. To get rid of pest number one was not at all difficult a matter for me, when once I set about thinking it over. In fact, I may say right here that this task set me by the elder Baron would have been impossible one had it not been for my intimate acquaintance with the natures and habits of peculiar. That's gonna be fun. Nature and habits and peculiarities of animal life. Always a close student of natural history, there was very little about the four-footed tenants of the fields which had escaped my observation. Accompanied by Bulger, armed with a pair of short wooden tongs and carrying a basket, I set out for the grain fields. Bulger was in high glee, for he had already made up his mind that there was sport ahead for him. In less than an hour, with him to point out their hiding places and to unearth them, I had captured 100 moles. Returning to the overseer's lodge, with his help, I cut off the nails of each mole's forefeet, close to the flesh, and then gave orders to have the lot carried back to the grain fields and released. Turning my attention now to the meadow mice, I realized at once that to get rid of pest number 2, it would be the most difficult task of all. The unthinking reader has doubtless already cried out and thought, why not turn a troop of cats into the meadows and let them make short work of the destructive little creatures? Ah, how easy it is to plan, but how difficult it is to execute. Know then, my clever friend, that the meadows were wet, and though often tied, the cats absolutely refused to enter them. I don't blame them. Cats don't like water. Well, mine does, but she's weird. Ah, destructive little creatures. Let's see. Okay. The merest tyro in natural history is aware of a cat's aversion to wetting its fur, and above all, stepping into water. Even moisture is disagreeable to a cat's feet, and she will willingly walk a mile rather than cross a plot of dew-moistened green sward, which is grass. However, I determined to begin my operations at once. Knowing the wonderful changes which the pangs of hunger will work in an animal's nature, forcing the meat eaters to turn to the herbage of the field for sustenance, I hoped for favorable results. Selecting half a dozen vigorous young cats from the cottages of our tenantry, and providing myself with a lot of India rubber caps used for drawing down over the necks of bottles in order to make them airtight, I proceeded to encase the legs of each cat in these coverings, cutting a hole in each one, however, so as to allow the paws to pass through. I wished to accustom them to these leggings before covering their feet entirely. My next step was to subject the cats to a 24-hour fast. Mine would rebel. After which I caused some of their favorite food, broiled fish, to be placed at the other end of a long room, covering the intervening space with long napped rugs, which I had first dipped into water. In spite of their hunger, they absolutely refused to cross the dripping rugs. Advancing to the edge, they tested the condition of the obstacles with their blocked advance upon the savory food, feeling here and there for a dry spot, and then retreating to piteous mewing as they shook the wet from their feet. Drawing the rubber caps completely over the feet of one of the cats, I now placed her on the wet rug, encouraging her to remain there by feeding her a few dainty bits of the fish. Finding that her feet did not get wet, she consented to walk here and there over the wet surface in order to secure toothsome bits of food. I made the same experiment with the other cats, and everything went as well as I could wish. The next day I continued my instruction, and to my great joy succeeded in schooling the whole lot, not only to make no objection to having their feet encased in the rubber boots, but to even wade through an inch or more of water in order to secure a particularly dainty bit of food. I was now ready to make a practical test of my trained hunters. The day preceding the trial, they were again subjected to a prolonged fast. I must frankly confess that my heart beat rather nervously as I, with the overseer and 2 other assistants, set out for the lowlands, carrying the trained mousers, already shod in their rubber boots, in 3 baskets. We advanced cautiously upon the meadowland, but so far as the mice were concerned, our caution was useless, for they ran about under our very feet. As I stood gazing over the long stretch of devastated meadowland, once so famous for its thick, velvety grass, the tears gathered in my eyes and my voice choked. Now or never, thought I, must the attempt be made to save these fair fields from utter ruin. At a wave of my hand, my assistant stooped and released the somewhat startled cats. They were not long, however, in collecting their wits and getting ready for business. Sharp hunger is an excellent sauce. As the 6 monsters leaped among those troops of tiny creatures, till that moment nibbling, playing, or teasing one another without a thought of harm or danger, the wildest consternation seized upon them. Not only near by us, but as far as the eye could reach, panic and disorder spread among these till then peaceful little beings. Those which sought safety in their holes were hurled back by others rushing frantically out into the open air. The cats kept at their work like avenging furies. They killed for the mere pleasure of killing, passing like a death-dealing blast here and there over the meadows. After the work of destruction had been kept up for half an hour, I directed that the trained 6 should be carried back to their quarters, for I was too good a general to let my troops get their fill of sack and plunder. The next day another attack was made upon the enemy. The trained 6, if anything, spread death right and left with a greater fury than at first. The wetlands no longer had any terrors for them. They splashed through puddles like mischievous boys through roadside brooks and ponds. I now bethought me of turning my attention to the ground squirrels. My first step was to send to town for several bushels of the smallest marbles that could be purchased. Then, having, with the assistance of my ever faithful and loving friend and helper, my near dumb brother, Bulger, located the whereabouts of several hundred burrows of the ground squirrels. I gave orders to have half a dozen or more of the marbles rolled down into each one of those holes. These labors completed, I withdrew to my apartments and set about amusing myself in several other ways, while awaiting a report from the overseer. Many of the tenants, who had watched my operation against the moles, meadow mice, and ground squirrels, even ventured openly to denounce this as wild whims, a dreamer idea, a silly working of a diseased mind. Poor creatures! They had lost their all. They had seen the labor of the long weary months ruined by these pests, and they were embittered and skeptical. I had not the heart to notice their rather impertinent utterances. While awaiting the development, I plunged into the delights of some tales of a bold traveler written in the ancient Assyrian tongue in the wedge-shaped letter. 3 days went by and no news from the superintendent. 2 more days, that made 5 full days. On the 6th still came nothing. At last, with the dawn of the 7th, I was awakened by a loud and continued cheering beneath my windows. Springing from my bed and drawing aside the curtains, I was astonished to see long lines of our tenantry, men, women, and children bearing banners, wreaths, garlands, etc. One company of the children carried long, from which from the end of which dangled dead moles, meadow mice, and ground squirrels. The moment I presented myself at the window, there came an outburst of cheering, so sturdy that the windows rattled before it. A tap at my door called me in another direction. It was the elder Baron. "Haste, little Baron," he cried eagerly. "Descend to the castle platform. The people are beside themselves with joy. Canst thou not hear their cries? Not a mole, nor a mouse, nor a squirrel is alive on the broad acres of thy estate. I say thy, because it is justly thine. Thou hast saved it from utter ruin. Henceforth, for the few years which kind Providence may will that I should tarry with thee, let it be as thy guest." Okay, so he's giving it to him. Sometimes this is kind of fun, I will say. Some of this antiquity language, this antique language, it's kind of fun. Oh, a little bit more. Henceforth, for the few years which kind Providence may will that I should tarry with thee, let it be as thy guest. "Nay, nay, Baron," I said laughingly, "that may not be. Till thou sleepest with the noble dead of our long and honored line, thou art master here." I pressed his hand reverently to my lips, and sent him to talk to the people until I should be ready to take my place at his side. I can well fancy how impatient the reader is to hear something more about the manner which I rid my ancestral estate of those noisome pests. With regard to the meadow mice, that needs no explanation, but the disappearance of the moles and ground squirrels seems somewhat mysterious. Well and good. I'll make it clear, gentle reader. If you had been as close a student of the natures and habits of these animals as I, you could have done the same thing yourself. You must know then that the mole's body bears about the same relation to his forefeet as a boiler does to a steam engine, which is admirably adjusted in all its parts, working smoothly and noiselessly like a thing of life, polished and beautiful in all of its bearings, and put together so skillfully that no human thought could better it. That is to say, the only wonderful thing about a mole is its hand, that it is a delight to a student of natural history. I have sat for hours and studied the marvelous shape of its hand, and the strange though it may seem to you, no one knows better than the mole himself that therein lies its hold on life. You'll bear in mind that if I caused the nails to be clipped off the forefeet of the 100 moles close to the flesh, and then turned them loose, in other words, without absolutely destroying their marvelous hands, I completely destroyed their usefulness. Now, another thing you must be taught, that in busy communities of these little animals there are no sluggards. Everyone must work. Only one thing stops him from using his hands, and that is death. When a soul, when a mole sees his fellows stop work, he knows what has happened. Upon the return of the 100 captives to their burrows, there was joy mingled with terror. Whose turn might come next? But when the moment arrived to fall into line and set to work, there was consternation. What? Alive, but not able to dig? Immediately, the wildest panic seizes upon the community. They abandon their homes. With frantic haste, they pierce new burrows in every direction, leaving their ill-fated companions behind them to lie a lingering death. literally buried alive. Weeks, months will elapse ere they recover from this wild fear, but by then they will be miles away. I think that's a good place to stop. So for now, we are on page 82, and we will start up again when next I do not have a guest. So please join us on Thursday. It's going to be a wonderful show. I have an amazing guest, and I'm so excited to introduce her to you. So that's all for now, my friends. Thank you so much for joining us. Never forget that you are amazing, you are loved. Be well, be safe out there, and I'll see you on the next show. Bye.